We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, Thoth, Trismegistus, and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash. The courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Hierophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the shamanic astrology paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rajar. For these and more, we give thanks.
Hello, my name is Mary Kern. I'm the president of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and we have a wonderful vlogcast coming for us today with Daniel Gimario, our founder. We're going to be discussing the 300 years for global humanity, involution or evolution. Today, we'll be exploring what global humanity is currently experiencing. And Daniel will be talking about the Great Awakening versus the Dark Night of the Soul, and answering the question, is this a great reset or is it an inversion? So with that, we'll be examining the evidence through an astrological lens using our signature, the ThreeWorldsApproach. There'll be a variety of subjects being covered, including hierarchical patriarchy, the demise of the matrilineal family structure, and much more. So with that, I'm going to ask Daniel to just begin.
Thank you, Mary. Well, back again for our monthly vlogcast covering a great deal of different subjects. Today, and this is actually kind of a preparation for what the school is going to be presenting as we approach the December solstice, which is on the grand subject of the turning of the ages. And this is kind of an expansion of that. It actually connects in with one of my great side interests over the years, which is looking at history, looking at long cycles of history, speculation on where global humanity is at this point. In other words, we're going to be looking actually further back than just one 26,000-year cycle. There's a wide variety of sources for this. It also includes strong connections to one of my side projects over the years, which was the Renaissance of the Sacred trips that I would do around the world and the research I've done in different parts of the world, and also exploring the vast amount of new information that's come through over the last 5 or 10 years in archaeology, anthropology, and it used to be that when I would give this presentation that we're going to look at now, it would happen at the very end of those yearly trips to places like Wales and Scotland and Ireland. And the title of what I would always share at the end with always updated information was, who are we and what the heck happened? You know, so it's like, what does it mean to actually be human? And then are we in a process of linear evolution, or is there something else going on here at this time period? And so that's the basic sense of what we're going to look at. And we'll also be always suggesting that we look at this with the signature approach of our school of the Three Worlds approach, to be able to see it from a celestial perspective, from a middle world or ordinary reality perspective, but also from the perspective of the underworld and the lower world mysteries. Let's, I think maybe a good way to get started would be, usually in our school, what we present is the turning of the ages viewpoint, which is that we are at the end and the beginning of a great 26,000-year cycle. Recently, through research and also through the insight of someone named Lisa Renee, it was suggested that actually it may be where we're at currently is 12 times 12 precessional cycles. And that would actually, if you just did the math, it's 312,000 years or so, right? But I'm not attached to a number like that. So that's what I'm just using in general, like around 300,000 years. Well, it's very interesting that in modern research, you can actually now stretch the existence of our type of human on this planet back 300,000 years. So it keeps being taken further back and further back. And a lot of this comes from research, recent research that's been done in Australia, actually, where there's a whole group of scientists down there that and researchers that are suggesting that out of Africa may not be accurate and may actually be out of Australia. Where the dream time first created the world we're in, that is where it took place. And as we've actually discovered more and more versions of the Homo species that we are, there's now 7 or 8 of them that have been found, that the whole situation seems to be far more complex than what we had thought. And this keeps expanding. I kind of like the idea of 12 times 12, and particularly as its ramifications for the time we're in now. Our school has, adjustment. Our school has always presented the idea that we are at the end and the beginning of a precessional cycle, but we also see it as a zone, and that zone would be from 1962 to 2034. Just will make another adjustment here. By the way, for those that are watching this, actually, Mary and I are in opposite sides of the world. So she is at sunset, and at this time of year, from where I'm speaking to you from, in outside of Metro Manila, this is the time of year where the sun is directly shining on me here in the office, and I have yellow golden curtains, and so that's the glow. It's kind of like having non-LED light, you know, when you have the nice orange glow coming through, right, or yellow. So that's what's happening. I can't make it any different than the way it is. So we've also in the past discussed a lot about that this is the end or the bottoming out of Kali Yuga, which is a whole other way of looking at where we are in time. And I very much have used the most recent research that was done, and we've actually talked about this in other presentations, about the research done by a man named Bibhu Dev Mishra, the end of the Kali Yuga in 2025, unraveling the mysteries of the Yuga cycle. And that will also be included for those who haven't seen it as part of this vlogcast. Mary, why don't you put up the Yuga? First, we can just briefly go through the front piece again briefly, which summarizes what we're going to talk about, and then go to the Kali Yuga chart.
Okay.
300,000 years for global humanity, evolution or involution? Are we going up? Are we going down? This is also associated with the idea of, are we in linear progress? And linear progress rather than cycles is only a modern, more modern artifact. I mean, that's not the way global humanity looked at things for a much longer period of time. Just briefly go through this because we're going to cover every one of these points. No, the other part of the front piece. Does it scroll? Yeah, not that. The written part of that. Maybe that's not there. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, no, but I do have it. I didn't.
No, it's all right. That'll be in the front piece when people see this. I'm just going to talk about all of it. Anyway,
Okay.
never mind. Let's go to the Kali Yuga chart. I am in the midst of doing research to be able to have a chart that matches the dates of the the 12 ages within a precessional cycle, the 26,000 years, and it pretty interestingly matches the way that Bibu, the pundit who created this modern research with the Kali Yuga, and you'll see here on this that the previous Kali Yuga started about 24,676 BC, about over 26,000 years is when that began. And then you would see where the Sat Yuga would be, the ascending Sat Yuga at 15,676 BC, and then the end of the Sat Yuga about 15,000 years ago, 12,676 BC. Now you can see the current Kali Yuga began at 3,676 BC, and that's a really interesting time period because so many great world calendars began around that time. It was not that far away from the beginning of the Mayan long count. Also, it was when we have the appearance of the very first abstract language, the cuneiform script of Sumeria. And then that actually relates to an idea that a lot of people have had, that there's actually a fairly well-known book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, that describes how the creation of abstract language, rather than sort of petroglyphs or, picture language and, another kind of symbolism, began the whole thing of separating humans from the creation. And actually was an attack on the matrilineal and more goddess-oriented cultures, and so we also could say it's around that time is the beginning of recorded history, around that time period, and that was 1/4 of the way back in the great precessional cycle. Now you'll look and see that the Kali Yuga itself will stretch from 3676 BC to 2025. 2025, like 4 years from now. So we're like, you could say we're coming out of the Kali Yuga. The density of the Kali Yuga is already, has already happened. And that will lead us, Mary, to a speculation near the end of our presentation here today regarding, are we slowly emerging from the bottom of Kali Yuga? Are we slowly moving into a new precessional cycle? Or is it something more dramatic happening, like the movement from Kali Yuga to a Sat Yuga, for example? We'll consider that later on. Go down a little further on this slide if you can. There's some notes here. This is what I hope to, create a more expanded view of for our December solstice presentation, or the one we're doing at the end of the year in particular. You can see here that there are different North Stars. So Vega was the North Star, 13,000 to 11,000 BC. But one of the things I've always found most incredible is the fact that it was during the most recent Sat Yuga that the star Deneb, which is in the Milky Way, was the North Star. And that is the only time in a precessional cycle when the Milky Way is perpendicular to the horizon, right? So basically, we'd have all these world cultures that would have some kind of a bird at the top of the world tree. This is like pretty universal symbol. Sometimes it's a swan, sometimes it's a vulture, sometimes it's an eagle. So you ascend the world tree but it's along the Milky Way. That is not the way that it is now. It's only during, it seems, only during a Sat Yuga where that situation happens. I'm also very fascinated, beyond the scope of our conversation here today, with how around 3200 BC, Aldebaran was on the vernal equinox. And then the hierarchical rise of the Pleiades at the vernal equinox was about over 5,000 years ago. So that is right at the beginning of the current Kali Yuga. Now, I love synchronicity, and one of the sources where I get sometimes inspiration from is something that Graham Hancock puts out, his team puts out every week, which are the recent discoveries in archaeology and anthropology and archaeoastronomy. And I just today saw this remarkable article. The world's oldest story, astronomers say global myths about the seven sisters of the Pleiades may reach back 100,000 years. Now, the Australians, the Aboriginal states further back than that. But the thing that is so cool about this article, and we'll include it from this blogcast, is they're showing that 100,000 years ago, one of the stars of the Pleiades would have been seen as a double star. So that actually it would have been seen as seven if you go further back. And so it's describing how the whole legend or myth of the seven sisters was from the time that it was seen as seven, which I thought was a very, very intriguing. So we're talking about ancient knowledge here. Speaking of the Kali Yuga, and this will then transition us into the next part of our inquiry. Let's look at the Kali Yuga thing. I don't want to walk you through this. I need to, what do I need to do? I have to get myself off, hide thumbnail. Okay, here we go. This is from an amazing book called Voices of the First Day, one of my favorite researchers, Robert Lawler. And this was in his book, his words, the concluding age, the one we live in now, is the most degenerate when separateness and division becomes open conflict. It is called the Kali Yuga, and in time becomes an incarnation of destruction. The Vishnu Puranas, a mythological text of the Hindus, and this is over 2,000 years old, described it this way. Kali brought sin into the world. In the Kali age, the proper order of human relations is reversed. Social status depends upon the ownership of property. Wealth has become the only source of virtue. Passion and luxury are the sole bonds between spouses. Falsity and lying are the conditions of success in life. Sexuality is the sole source of human enjoyment. Religion, a superficial and empty ritual, is confused with spirituality. Can you imagine a more spot-on description of what could be called at our current time the Great Inversion? I mean, one example of that would be the fact that for long periods of time, to be a king or a queen or to be a philosopher, king, or the ruler of some kind, the first thing they had to have was spiritual initiation. Well, now look at the people who are actually running the show. I mean, it's just really like a perfect description of what is described in here by the Vishnu Puranas. I think they call out why it is what we're seeing happening may in fact be involution rather than evolution. Okay, that this will be part. You'll have this quote as part of the vlogcast. I would like to now go into some of the other indicators. Oh yeah, I got to put this back up now. So I can see you, Mary.
Mm.
There we go. Full screen. Where's full screen?
Well, I can just not share. How about that?
Oh, okay. There we go. Right. So there's a number of different things that are indicators, I think, of it being here at this point more involution than evolution. And in involution, I'm talking about spirit into matter, rather than some kind of up and out sort of thing. I'm using involution and evolution and as a kind of think of, if we look at the 300,000 years as cycles, or we could also think of them as waves. So there would be like sort of up and down and up and down and up and down. And so the Sat Yuga is like up here, and then it descends down to Kali Yuga, and then it goes back up in cycles. So what I've noticed in exploring world culture is that one of the symbols, and Lawler's research, as well as others, point this out, that one of the hallmarks of Kali Yuga is that patriarchy becomes dominant. So that actually for a much larger time period in human history, that we have matrilineal family descent. Now, I'm not espousing matriarchy as an opposite of patriarchy, but we're speaking here of a situation that is so beautifully written by people like the research of Maria Gimbutas, Rian Eisler, Chalice and the Blade, Sacred Pleasure. It was Rian Eisler who brought out that beautiful concept of Gailani, of a culture that's collaborative, that is partnership-based and sharing-based. And it's my contention, based upon not mainstream, but basically not the doctrine of the universities that are holding an agenda, is that for a much longer period of time, human beings were that. They were collaborative. There was an equality, an equal collaboration between men and women. It wasn't what, like in Kali Yuga, where it's about separation and division. And that, in fact, if we go all the way back, there are many cultures in hunter-gatherer times where it was actually a dual system, where there would be both matrilineal and patrilineal that would be equal. Actually, the original culture of Polynesia was that way, where the family lineage would go through the oldest son and the oldest daughter. But then in other parts of the world, it was clearly established through matrilineal descent. But that a feature of the end times in the bottom of a Kali Yuga time is patriarchy. It's the only time it emerges, and it represents like the kind of thing that needs to be there, it seems, for there to be the composting to happen, if we can put it that way. I've always been fascinated by the remnants of matrilineal traditions around the world, and that is, and you've been on some of our trips, I know, and we go to those places where it's still in the land. All right. Another thing that seems to happen as we descend into a Kali Yuga, as we descend into the end and the beginning of a processional cycle, is that what had previously been a worldwide shamanic / animistic spirituality became where we have many gods and many goddesses who are primarily forces of nature, you know, plants, animals, stars, mountains, the weather, and so on, all got subsumed into one dominant god. Now this is a very different thing than appreciating that all the gods and goddesses exist within a unity. They're all expressions of a wholeness. But it's the establishment of this one monotheistic God, almost always male, is actually therefore connected to the same kind of descent, which is patrilineal. It's way beyond the scope of this conversation. Actually, Rian Eisler tries to explore it. Others have tried to explore it about, so on a more materialistic level, why did it happen? I'm giving kind of a wider, you know, view of this is what happens at this time in the larger cycles. Connected with this would be the doctrine which is called dominion. Which is, you know, comes from the Christian tradition, but it also comes from the peculiar sort of European view of colonization, but it's deeper than that. It's the idea that human beings have dominion over the creation, and if you put that together with the alphabet versus the goddess, abstract language. I mean, it's all about separating humans from the creation, which was completely contrary to hundreds of thousands of years of human history, where humans were part of the creation. We were connecting as above, so below. That we were kind of an organ of perception that was there experiencing as part of creation, not rulership over it. So I think that's a very important point. So we have the abstract language, we have dominion. You can see this even in the way that the law is written. Actually, the European explorers believed they had the right to take anything from people who didn't believe in private property. So that if they didn't believe in ownership of land or private property, that they were not fully human, and that gave them the right to do it. That was written in the law. It's actually still in the law of the Supreme Court, and I have documents on that to show that. It's why Native Americans don't really own their land. I mean, they have they're called a nation, but they don't really have a title to it. But they never believed that they should have a title to it. So therefore, it's owned by the corporation. These are all hallmarks, as you saw in the great quote of the features of the Kali Yuga. And bringing up every one of these, of which every one of them could have a much longer section. I'll just listing them all out right now. Is what I call the myth of linear progress, which seems to be doctrinaire in the current academic world. Obviously, there's exceptions to that breaking through, but it's the idea that even at the end of the 19th century, the belief we know now everything we need to know. It was the most extreme version of, quote, settled science that you could ever imagine, and this then has now been turned into a religion that is called scientism. Where it's no longer about inquiry and testing and hypothesis and so on, but it's a belief that we have this ascent, linear progress. how could those people have built the pyramids? How, how could the ancients have known that? I mean, as if they didn't know such. There's all kinds of ancient technologies that have been suppressed, and the ancients, we don't know for sure what they were, but what in our arrogance gives us the right to say they didn't have something that was more beautiful than the kind of the kind of power systems and energy systems that we have today. So I mean, the myth of progress is about linear, and what I'm suggesting here is that for long periods of time it was oscillation, up and down and up and down, and so where are we now? It's a big question. So let me just pause for a moment as I have thrown out these. By the way, in previous talks, I frequently have called the first four. I've called it the quadruple aberration. Which went into who are we and what happened, because essentially what humans have been for a long period of time is it's hard to remember what that is, and it's certainly not becoming more AI, in my opinion. I mean, to me, that's a Kali Yuga thing also. It's like the destruction of our basic humanity, our connection to the earth and the land and the sky and our heart and our soul and our spirit and, consciousness itself, right? Thoughts on all of this, Mary?
I'm just aware that modern research is showing that the whole idea of evolution doesn't even work, that these changes that came about in human existence didn't happen gradually. They're actually finding now that it pretty much happened all at one time. And so it kind of kicks out everything that we've learned traditionally in our school system. And of course, we've unearthed these incredible cultures all over the world, many of them using pyramid forms and other sacred geometry, subtly different, vibrationally a little bit different. And they're concluding that there was a very specific reason for that. I think there's a lot of evidence that we've had much higher cultures, that we've communicated beyond this planet with some of these sacred sites that you've taken people to, Daniel, and that these are receivers and transmitters. And there's just a whole beautiful array of evidence that is challenging everything that we've ever thought about our culture and how we came to be here. So yeah, it's
a good example of that is that it wasn't until the last few decades that the doctrine of geology was gradualism, and they would immediately throw out any view of that there was ever any major quick catastrophes, whether it was an asteroid strike or it was like the sudden melting of the ice. And it is now like pretty well established that if we look at the northern part of the world, if we look at North America, that there was a great ice age that was happening, and they come every so often, and that happened all through, I mean, all the way back as to 25,000 years ago. It was the onset of that great ice age in Europe, North America, and so on. But it was already melting. It was already diminishing when this event happened. And that event happened right at the halfway point in the precessional cycle, like about halfway back, 12,800 years ago. Actually, it's almost exactly the same date that it was used by Plato in describing the destruction of Atlantis. It's pretty amazing how that matches up. But now it seems pretty clear that some event happened, whether it was a cometary impact, a solar event, but something happened that caused a freeze up that was more frozen than the height of the actual ice age, right? And so this lasted for about 1,200 years. So it's called the Younger Dryas among geologists. and everything froze up like crazy. And mainly, of course, being European-centric, a lot of the scientists are early looking at, well, what happened in North America? It certainly wasn't happening around the equator, which is, I believe, where civilization is, wherever we use that word, was existing during the Ice Age, and is doing quite well. But then what happened is that you have this incredible freeze up, and then it has now been established something else happened, and most of the researchers I follow, Robert Schoch being one of them, I was pretty convinced that it was like a micronova or a solar event of some kind, and in the course of just a short number of years, it melted. And it was during that time period that the oceans went up about 300 meters. And large areas of land were submerged, including the heartland of the great civilization that was in South Asia, around Indonesia, and between Malaysia and Indonesia, Sundaland. It also happened in other parts of the world. But this is now known that this happened, but I mean, we can't conclusively say what it was. Most of the people that I follow, and also non-mainstream geologists, right, will say that it was a cometary impact, and they've even kind of located it as coming from the Taurian meteor shower, and that there's a lot of information out about that. All I know is that, yeah, something dramatic happened at that point, and then also something even more dramatic happened 1,200 years after that. And so catastrophism is now accepted. You can see the remains of it in the Badlands area of Oregon. If you drive out of Portland and you go toward Idaho, you can absolutely see the remains of the way the water had washed away the soil, and you see the gullies that were happened by vast floods that happened at that particular time. So that's just one example about how the consensus mainstream view has shifted. Another is, oh, that humans only showed up in America in the Clovis culture. 12,000 years ago, they came down the land bridge. There are countless studies now that show human presence in North and South America way earlier than that. In fact, there's a great book I would suggest called America Before by Graham Hancock, going into a lot of it, including the discovery that there's DNA in Amazonian, some of the hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist in the Amazon that have DNA that's only found among people from New Guinea and in Australia. So how does that happen? I mean, that's certain, and for that to be like that, it has to be older than 70,000 years, and they can tell that by the mutation rate of DNA. That in order to have a certain kind of complexity of DNA, it requires a certain amount of years, right? The mutations to happen. One of the more out there theoreticians about this suggests that how that happened was that there were people when the climate was different, the coastline of Antarctica was exposed, and so they would take their boats from Australia along the coastline of Antarctica and then go into South America. It's very, very compelling, but it really requires a much more expanded view of what has happened on this planet, most of it covered up. I think we were just talking about this before, not today, but in another time, about how many of the giant skeletons have been covered up.
Wow, yes.
And a lot of books on that there was a version of humanity that was a lot taller, and it may actually be represented by the Göbekli Tepe monoliths, or the ones at Kallanish, they're actually representing the elite that were about at that point, who were the the seed people from the destruction that had happened before, you know. You're I know we've talked about a lot of these things, you know, in the
Right.
past, and so this is just a way of you know, summarizing some of these points. So when I first started sharing the Kali Yuga stuff together with the processional material, and then looking honestly at the state of global humanity, and you know, how it's being run at this point, and you know, who are the celebrities, you know, who are considered to be the heroes of the game, you know, it's power and money and how many armaments you have, which is completely contrary to how it had been for long periods of time in history. I thought for a long time, following the wave pattern, that if you're at the bottom of Kali Yuga, if you're at the end and the beginning of a processional cycle, then it's like a slow ascent, you know, back up to a golden age. There are those that have looked at this, and even looking more deeply into the documents provided by gentleman I described who did the research on the Kali Yuga, it's not specific or inherent in there that it would be this slow ascent, all right? And so some voices are basically saying, and I'm beginning to suspect that if anything that I'm saying has any veracity, any truth, that coming out of this, bottoming out of this Kali Yuga, if it's within the framework of 12 times 12 of them, or 300,000 years of global humanity, it well may be that the next step is going into a golden age, right? That it's actually shifting into something that has been referred to as prime Earth. Now, where would that be? Where would prime Earth be? And there's a lot of different views about that, because of course, if you look at it from a middle world perspective, or even from an underworld perspective, it doesn't look good for the Earth. But if we don't have a purely human-centric approach, then, you know, I think Gaia or the sun is going to have something to do with it. There's a concern, I'm sure, that those powers, you know, great mystery, the powers of great mystery, love the planet as much as we do, and will do whatever's necessary for its revival.
What about also the part of the galaxy that our solar system is moving through, out in the one arm of the Milky Way? I've actually heard it said that we are approaching a photon belt, and the light from that is part of
it's too bad we don't have a graph on that, but it has to do a slide on that. It has to do with the fact that if you imagine the plane of the galaxy, and we're kind of an outlier, we're not that close to galactic center, that there's an oscillation over a long periods of time, up and down, relative to the plane. So there's only certain times in much longer cycles that our solar system is kind of in the center of the plane. So it's receiving like the direct hit from what is being emanated from galactic center. Yeah. And this, oh my gosh, and this, Mary, this goes back to the 1970s, where people were talking about, oh, the photon belt, you know. But it also includes the fact that we're moving into a zone, and NASA knows this, we're moving into a zone of space surrounding the solar system. It's like the solar system is moving through a zone. There's a lot more stuff. I mean, so it's not just more cosmic rays, you know, more beams coming through, you know, accelerating things on one or the other level, but it's also more debris. So there's a lot more stuff being detected out there. Is it just because we only started looking for it, or I don't know, but some would say that there really is more, right? There's that factor also, like the fact that the solar system in a much larger cycle. I mean, if we looked at this whole thing all the way back, I only took it back 300,000 years, human history, global humanity, right? But our species, the experiment of spirit into matter, who we are, all right? But if we took it back further, well, the solar system goes around galactic center in 260 million years. That's another larger cycle. And then it goes back to, mainstream, quote, consensus in the mainstream is that it all started with a quote, Big Bang. I personally have a different view. I mean, I think there could have been that, but I'm much more a steady state person, thinking that the creation is eternal. So there's not like, because if you go back to a Big Bang, well, then nobody answers the question, what was before that? I think that it's a perpetual birthing and dying and birthing and dying and up and down and up and down. It's hard for me to see much going on that shows that it's like going up, unless it's the deepest descent, the deepest dark night, the deepest point of composting. And that composting is unlikely, in my view, to be done by humans totally. In other words, they will not be allowed to completely destroy the earth. I mean, the earth will be restored one way or another. So that's why I think the question is, so where's prime earth? I mean, Lynn was telling me, she heard from one of the people, one of the sources she follows, this is using, the model that there are extraterrestrial races. I mean, I can do 300,000 years of history without including that. It makes it a more controversial, and most of the people I study can look at it as hybridization, just even on this planet. It doesn't even require that, but I'm not close to that being happening. But she was telling me this view that she said that the good aliens, right, our good space brothers, are waiting for it getting really bad on this planet and will be taken off for a while. And then the 300-year transition zone, is the cleanup of the planet, which requires, of course, a lot of collateral damage. So you have the whole cleanup of the planet, and then people who really love the Earth will be brought back, and then we find the Earth is again prime Earth. I kind of like that, the way of looking at it.
How the idea that during the Kali Yuga, only 25% of the heart is available. Now that comes from the Vedas, doesn't it? Or where does that? Yes. And it so ties in to the slide that we had describing what it would be like at this time. And it also kind of feeds into the idea of the Aquarian Dispensation, that humanity would arrive at this same time, needing to awaken to their own divinity, their own connectedness to spirit, which has always been there, but which has been hidden, with all of the energy medicine and people really learning how to tune into spirit and co-create with spirit. I mean, that was not something I was very mindful of before my introduction to shamanic astrology and some of the other.
Yeah, thank you for remembering about that. So let me kind of explain that a little bit more, because there's two different issues here. The one about that in each of the 4 yugas, in Sat Yuga, there's 100% of the heart. And then in Kali Yuga, and it goes down 50%, down 75%, 50% down to 25%. Now, this does not mean that you yourself have only 25% of your heart. This is a generalization of global humanity. Actually, from what I've heard from some of my teachers, is that what it actually means is that if your heart is really open in Kali Yuga, that is a far more powerful thing than when everybody has it. You know, so to have the heart open in Kali Yuga carries a strength that is exceptional. You know, so this is not saying you only have 25%, but rather it's like a broad brushstroke of you know, where global humanity is at this point. Now, the other thing you're bringing up about the Aquarian Dispensation, this actually goes back to sort of mythic history. Many different people in the theosophical and anthroposophical worlds talked about this. Some of the early work on the all the books written in the 1920s, where they believed that was the beginning of the Aquarius age. Then I've seen those books. They talk about the so-called Aquarian Dispensation, and it goes back to 5,000–6,000 years ago. And the idea was that at that time, that something like the caste system, which was based on bloodline, did have a certain essence. There was a certain reality to it. So that if a Brahmin caste, for example, or Plato had his own version of it too. You know, Plato believed in the 4 castes also. That individual modeled the best of all the capacities of a human being. It was genuine sovereignty and autonomy, and that their main function was to model for humanity those qualities and to serve the people. Right? Very, very different than, say, monarchy or kingship or presidentship or premiership or head of Google, the way that works today. And so what they knew, the ones that had the purity of the tradition knew, is that it would all fall apart, that it would go into chaos, it would go into darkness. And they then had a prophecy that there would be a time period, and this is what was called the Aquarian Dispensation, when the bloodline of being able to connect with infinity, our sovereignty and our autonomy, would be spread to all of global humanity. And this actually was hijacked by the idea that, oh, the return of the Christ, you know, like there would be the return of the Messiah, the return of I mean, there's been so many different versions of that. You know, we're waiting for Jesus to return. We're waiting for the Maitreya to return. You know, there's different versions of it in different parts of the world. But what they were saying was, no, it's when everyone gets that that's who they are. So there's no need for elites. There's no need for philosopher kings, because if we know who we really are, we are that. That's the Aquarian Dispensation. And that's where I've spent so many talks. You've heard most of them. I mean, people that follow my work in these vlogcasts and seminars, it's like, oh my God, there he goes again, talking about the shadow of Aquarius. To me, it's the shadow, it's the hijack of Aquarius, and preventing people from understanding this aspect of it. Then it becomes our connection to spirit, our connection to our God self, our connection to our Christos Sophia soul, you know, things like that. And that's what I stand for. And that's not the facsimile called AI.
No, it's waking up is what we talk about, is waking up and having these higher realm realizations. And a lot of the earth is doing that, thank goodness, because I think that there's as opposed to herd immunity, there is a soul connection that is occurring all over the world. And that love, that power of that love and that connection is so much stronger than the darkness among us, that that may be the counter force that we really need.
We have to commit ourselves to that, and maybe we can actually close our discussion by saying, what is the purpose of our school? The purpose of our school is to assist in the awakening, and on a more personal level, it is to assist human beings to know who they are and to know their place on the wheel, to know what their life purpose themes are, know how to fulfill their intended purpose. And then that extends to global humanity, like how can that happen? Well, we don't know. I mean, it's beyond our control. I mean, we don't know what great mystery has in mind or store for us, but our commitment in our school is with the creation of what I like to think of as seed people. Those who can connect to the magic and the mystery of what has gone before, a remembrance of who we really are, and then being open to look truthfully at what is happening on the planet now, to be able to call out evil when evil is there. I mean, I'm one of these idealistic people who didn't even, until I read an amazing book called The War of the Gods and Addiction, when I realized that Jung himself finally realized that, oh yeah, there is archetypal evil, and what is archetypal evil? It's the absence of being human. And when you're no longer human, then it could become evil, So when that you're not connected to the heart or to spirit, how that, and to realize that that needs to be called out, and so there's that's the middle world thing about it, and then the willingness to dream the vision forward. We're intenders. I intend prime Earth. How about you? I intend the sovereignty and the autonomy of the individual. I have a commitment to Human 1.0 that does not seek dominion over the creation, that does not want to separate. I'm way more interested in being part of the unfolding.
I'm with you, Daniel, and I hope one of our on the ground gatherings is at that primal Earth place at some point in the future. That would be beautiful.
And just an announcement that we will be having a presentation just before before the December solstice, which will be our normal year look ahead of the next year. It'll also be kind of a global update and doing a recap on the Saturn-Uranus configuration, which, by the way, is really right now we're doing this presentation right with the T-square accented by the moon position of Mars, Saturn, Uranus. So this is an intense passage right now as Mars is about to come out of the underworld. But then right at the end of the year, there will be a more extended presentation on the turning of the ages itself as we move forward. So thank you for helping me with this, Mary, and I love having you help me out on these, so I know I did most of the talking, but I know you were with me on it, and until next month, I have no idea what that topic is going to be at the moment. And for those that are listening to this that have taken courses and who are members of the school and are interested, next week will be our next mentoring call, and that'll be on cosmology. By special request, it was to do a part 2 on cosmology from those that understand what we're teaching regarding that part of the school's curriculum. So,
okay.
Till I see you next time.
Yes, and that solstice event, just so you can mark your calendar, is on December 18th. It is a Saturday in the US starting at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you want to translate that into whatever country you're living in, and please join us then. It will it's not just a gathering, it's a celebration, and
It is.
great mystery likes to be acknowledged.
It's our ceremonial approach to these sacred timings.
It is. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye for now.